There's something uniquely horrifying about hearing the word sewage screamed at full volume by a woman holding your garden hose like it just bit her. Especially when she's standing in a swimsuit, next to a half-filled pool, and your entire neighborhood is filming from behind their hedges. Yep, that's me, standing on my porch with a coffee in one hand and the county's water violation hotline on speaker in the other. You're probably wondering how we got here, how a simple backyard hose turned into suburban warfare, and why my neighbor Karen is now known around here as Swamp Queen. It started with a bill, not a screaming match or a trespassing charge or a drone flying over my tomato plants. No, the chaos began with a humble, slightly too thick envelope from the Willow Lane Utility District. I remember peeling it open with one hand while sipping coffee in the other, fully expecting my usual 45 and some change. But when I unfolded the statement, my eyes locked on a number that didn't make sense, 312.46, for water. That's not a typo, I triple-checked. I live alone, don't own a hot tub, and the closest I get to landscaping is occasionally spraying the driveway when the squirrels get bold. But here I was being billed like I was running a car wash and an illegal water park out of my garage. I chalked it up to a fluke, maybe a pipe leak, maybe the meter was read wrong. That is, until the next month's bill showed 341.82, and the one after that, 368.09. That's when I knew someone was bleeding my pipes like a tick in August. I started watching, not obsessively at first, just glancing out the window during the evening when the air cools and the neighborhood comes alive with its daily suburban rituals. That's when I noticed her. Karen Mitchell, HOA president, 5-year title holder, and self-appointed monarch of Willow Bend Estates. She was leaning on the side of my fence, the one that separates my back gate from the alley that connects our lots, casually tugging my garden hose through a gap in the boards. At first, I thought she was just borrowing it, one neighbor helping another. I even gave her the benefit of the doubt, maybe she thought I'd offered before. But when I stepped outside to say something, she disappeared, vanished like a ghost, leaving only the faint hiss of running water and the stretched green belly of my hose slinking under the fence like a stolen limb. That was the moment it clicked. The pool. Karen had installed a pool last spring, Olympic blue, obnoxiously oversized, and trimmed in some god-awful faux Mediterranean tile that she claimed blended with the natural aesthetic. What she meant was it made her lawn look like a set piece from a Real Housewives set. And now, with the city enforcing water restrictions due to the summer drought, Karen's precious oasis was parched. She couldn't legally fill it without permits or ration allowances. But why bother with permits when you can siphon water straight from the neighbor's faucet like a mosquito with a platinum card? I set up a trail camera the next day. Not one of those cheap motion detectors either. I pulled out the good one I use for deer tracking, tucked it behind the hydrangeas by the spigot. And just like clockwork, 2 mornings later, I had footage of Karen, robe, sunglasses, coffee mug and all, turning on my faucet like it was her personal wellspring. Her little white pool hose snaked across the lawn, under the fence, and into her backyard like a vinyl umbilical cord feeding her chlorinated baby. I confronted her that afternoon, politely. I swear, I kept my voice low and calm. Knocked on her door, waited for the chime, and greeted her with a neighborly, "Hey, Karen, quick question about my water bill." She blinked at me with that tight-lipped HOA smile. The kind that says, I'm pretending to be civil because there are witnesses. I told her I had footage. I didn't threaten her. I just asked if maybe she'd been using my spigot by mistake. She gasped, touched her chest, and gave me a line so oily it could have lubed a semi-truck. Oh goodness, no, I would never. Maybe it was the landscapers. Or that boy who walks dogs in the morning. Are you sure it wasn't someone else? I knew it was her. She knew it was her. But instead of owning up, Karen went full Karen. 2 days later, I had a violation slip taped to my door. Improper hose storage, visible from the street. A $75 fine, courtesy of the HOA. The hose, mind you, had been coiled neatly on its reel for 6 years without issue. That was just the beginning. The next week, I got dinged for excessive water usage causing turf overhydration. Turf overhydration. My grass looked like every other lawn on the street, half dead and patchy from heat. The week after that, unlicensed irrigation nozzle. I didn't even know what that meant. Then came the kicker. a proposal at the monthly HOA meeting to create a new ordinance. All water fixtures must conform to visual standards and may not create dissonance with the neighborhood's landscaping harmony. Direct quote. Guess who submitted it? Karen. Guess who seconded it? Her best friend Cheryl, the one with the 9 lawn gnomes and the illegal koi pond she built by bulldozing the community median. And guess who the ordinance targeted? Just one homeowner, the one with the non-standard spigot. Me. That's when it became clear this wasn't just about water. Karen had declared war. Every polite conversation I tried to have after that turned into a pissing match of bureaucratic nonsense. I once left her a note asking if she'd move my recycling bin off the curb. She had. The next morning, I woke up to a noise violation taped to my garage for a wind chime. A single bamboo wind chime hung on a nail from the porch beam since 2003. The noise? Disruptive tonal irregularity. You can't make this stuff up. Oh, and the drone. That sweet little airborne goblin started showing up every morning around 6 a.m., buzzing just low enough to rattle the branches of my apple tree. I'd hear it just as I poured my coffee, that faint electric whine, and sure enough, there it was, hovering like a sentient piñata with a GoPro, watching my yard. I caught it on camera 3 times. Karen, of course, denied it was hers. Probably teenagers, she said, adjusting her oversized visor. So many drones these days. But I'd seen it land in her upstairs window box more than once, folding like a mechanical beetle into its nest. The next water bill hit $394. I took it straight to the city water office, demanding an inspection. The guy they sent out was a nice enough fellow, but when he read the meter and found no leaks, he just shrugged. Someone's using it, he said, patting the top of the meter cover. Just maybe not you. By this point, I'd given up on reason. Karen wasn't stealing out of necessity. She was doing it because she could. Because as HOA president, she thought the rules didn't apply to her, only to the people she didn't like. And unfortunately for me, I'd become her favorite project. That pool of hers, that greedy cement rectangle in her backyard, was a monument to her entitlement. And she was going to fill it, legally or not, with water that didn't belong to her, from a neighbor she'd decided to make miserable. But what Karen didn't realize was that I wasn't just a guy with a hose and a grudge. I was a patient man, a very patient man, and I had plans, real ones. Because while she was busy weaponizing HOA clauses and blaming mysterious teenagers, I was starting to draft a plan of my own. One that involved plumbing, surveillance, and a little something I like to call the revenge faucet. But we'll get to that. First, I had to gather evidence, build a case, lay the groundwork for what would become the most disgusting, poetic, and legally satisfying retaliation this side of the municipal sewage line. Because Karen may have started this war with a stolen hose and a smug grin, but I was going to end it with a flood, and not the clean kind. I stopped thinking of it as a war when I caught myself whispering "target acquired" under my breath after installing a motion sensor behind the azaleas. That's when I knew. This wasn't a dispute anymore, it was a sting operation. Karen had turned my property into a battleground, and if she was going to run this HOA like a suburban dictatorship, then I was going to be her polite, calculating little revolution. After the 3rd straight month of unexplained water bills and nightly drone surveillance, I stopped reacting and started planning. It began with cameras, plural. The first was a doorbell cam. Innocent enough, nothing HOA could complain about, though I'm sure she tried. But the real workhorse was a camouflaged infrared wildlife camera I mounted to the gutter, aimed down at my spigot. Motion activated, time-stamped, and backed up to a cloud account she couldn't touch. I added a second one beneath the back deck, then another in the honeysuckle, pointing toward the gap in the fence where the hose kept disappearing. For 2 weeks, I let the data accumulate. I didn't interfere, didn't move the hose, didn't confront anyone. I just watched, observed, tracked, and oh boy, did she deliver. I now had 16 individual video clips of Karen, or sometimes her landscaper, a sunburned guy with a nervous twitch, pulling my hose under the fence, threading it through a series of ceramic turtle statues, and feeding it directly into her pool. The best footage? Wednesday, 10:42 a.m., full sunlight. Karen in a leopard print swimsuit and wide-brimmed hat, reclining in a lounger while the water poured in. Her phone in one hand, a margarita in the other, and my hose resting in the corner of her pool like a guilty snake. She even had the gall to occasionally wave at the drone, which hovered like a smug little vulture over both our yards. Speaking of drones, I finally got proof of that too. My honeysuckle cam picked it up one morning at 6:03 a.m., lifting out of Karen's second-floor window planter like some futuristic cicada. It zipped across my yard, lingered over my deck, then took a scenic loop over my garden before returning to its nest. I uploaded the footage to 3 separate hard drives, 2 cloud accounts, and a thumb drive I now kept inside my sock drawer like it was nuclear launch code. But even with all that, I knew evidence alone wasn't enough. Karen was the HOA president, and the HOA was her kingdom. Complaints against her disappeared like socks in a laundromat. The only way to win was to prove she had no jurisdiction over me at all. So, I started digging, literally, in city records. I took a personal day and spent 6 hours in the county assessor's office, surrounded by faded maps, scanned documents, and suspiciously sticky library tables. After 3 cups of vending machine coffee and enough eye strain to qualify for workers' comp, I struck gold. My property, Lot 14B, on what used to be the Oak Ridge Agricultural Zone, was technically never annexed into Willow Bend Estates. Back when the developers bought the land, they had to negotiate usage rights with my home's previous owner, an elderly woman named Ruth, who'd refused to join the HOA. Turns out Ruth had teeth. She'd insisted on a grandfather clause, baked into the municipal zoning agreement, stating that 14B would remain exempt from all HOA bylaws so long as the primary structure wasn't demolished or reconstructed. And guess what? I bought the house as is, structurally unchanged, which meant all those citations, every fine, every ordinance, every bogus infraction, legally void. I sat in that stuffy records office and laughed so hard the clerk asked if I needed help. No, I told him, folding the old zoning document like it was a Declaration of Independence. I just remembered I'm not crazy. Armed with my exemption, I headed home to find a fresh violation taped to my front door. Complaint: compost generates excessive negative energy. Suggested remediation, relocation, or total removal. Underneath, in tiny print, was a citation for barking with malicious tone. My dog, Peaches, a 10-year-old golden retriever with arthritis and a facial expression that's permanently apologetic, had apparently violated HOA Rule 37B, Domestic Pet Sound Regulation. According to Karen's written complaint, Peach's vocal timbre expressed contempt for HOA officials. I didn't know if I should laugh or call a therapist. I decided on a beer. But while I drank it, I had an idea. If Karen was going to treat HOA codes like biblical scripture, then I was going to fight back the same way, through the fine print. And lucky for me, the fine print had already gifted me an ace up the sleeve, a water covenant. It was buried in the same zoning archive where I found the grandfather clause, an ancient municipal utility agreement from 1972. Back when the neighborhood was still farmland, the city had established a private water access covenant for the original structures, allowing designated homeowners to maintain independent water hookups in exchange for a minor surcharge. That included my home, but it did not include Karen's. Which meant 2 things. 1, I paid for my own water, not the HOA's bulk rates, and 2, any unauthorized redirection or usage of my line by a non-covenant household, that wasn't just theft. It was a civil code violation, one that could carry fines and, if proven, could result in the disqualification of an HOA board member. I had all the pieces now: video evidence, municipal immunity, a civil water covenant, and still, I didn't go to the board. Not yet. I wasn't ready to win. I wanted her to dig deeper, get smugger, bolder. Because the higher she climbed on her little power ladder, the farther she'd fall when I yanked it out from under her. I knew Karen was a creature of ego. All I had to do was feed it, so I stopped resisting. I made a show of complying with her idiotic violations. I coiled my hose in a bright yellow container labeled Karen Approved. I moved my compost 3 feet to the left and put up a sign that said, Now Certified Low Energy. I even bought a fake bark collar for Peaches and, Walked her past Karen's house every morning with a note clipped to her collar. Working on our tone. It was all bait. Every passive-aggressive compliance, every sarcastic nod at her drone, every lawn sign that said, "Ask your HOA where your water went," it was designed to make Karen feel invincible. And it worked. The citations kept coming. The drone flew lower. One morning I caught her landscaper, not the nervous one, but a new guy in Karen's branded polo, walking my hose back from her yard like it was no big deal. I asked him if he needed something, and he just said, "Miss Karen said you were cool with it." I told him I was cool with lawsuits too. That spooked him, but not enough to stop. 2 days later, I finally got what I needed. My honeysuckle cam caught a crystal-clear, full-color video of Karen's pool guy, an unlicensed contractor named Marcos, according to his van, running my hose over the fence, inserting it through a port in her pool wall, and leaving it to run while she laid on a float sipping sangria. The best part? She waved at the camera. She actually waved, like she was on a parade float. I took a screenshot, printed it, and slid it into a folder titled Exhibit A, Her Majesty Steals. But I still wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. I wanted one more thing. Proof that she wasn't just stealing from me, but from everyone. So I filed a public records request with the City Utility Board, requesting HOA-wide usage stats. Took a few days, but when they came back, I almost choked on my lemonade. Karen's address, 110 Willow Bend Lane, had reported consistent low water usage every month for the last 6 months. In fact, she used less water per month than the elderly couple next door who didn't own a dishwasher. So either she'd developed magical hydration powers, or she was offloading her pool refills on someone else. Me. And likely others too. That's when I finally smiled. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the queen? She was floating in her stolen water throne, blissfully unaware that the peasant from next door was about to teach her the true meaning of dirty politics. And I mean that quite literally. But we'll get to the sewage, soon. The idea came to me while elbow-deep in a busted garbage disposal, listening to my old buddy Cal, the closest thing I've got to a plumbing Yoda, ramble about septic codes and municipal loopholes over speakerphone. I wasn't even thinking about revenge at that moment, not consciously. But as Cal said the phrase, graywater redirection, I dropped my wrench and just stood there in the silence, staring at the ceiling like I was waiting for divine approval. Graywater. The term itself has a certain poetry. Not raw sewage, not clean drinking water, just the murky, mildly disgusting middle ground where laundry runoff and shower dribble live. Not toxic enough to violate federal law, not clean enough for anything useful, but when piped somewhere on purpose, it can become something beautiful, something symbolic. Something absolutely humiliating for someone who steals water with a smug smile and a leopard print floaty. So, let me get this straight. I asked Cal later that afternoon, pacing around the backyard with a legal pad full of sketches and evil doodles. You're telling me that with the right backflow diverter, I could legally reroute the spigot by my fence to connect to the auxiliary drain line? Cal paused, probably realizing he was complicit in something that had the word retaliation written all over it. In theory, he said slowly, as long as you cap off the potable supply and mark it as non-potable, you'd have to use a dual-valve fitting with a vacuum breaker. You're not trying to poison anyone, right? Of course not, I lied, just trying to discourage unauthorized use. He chuckled, but not in a warm way. You're up to something. I'm both impressed and afraid. I got city permits the next morning. Told the clerk I was installing a graywater system to irrigate a native plant demonstration zone. She didn't even blink, just handed me a packet and wished me luck. It's amazing what bureaucracy will approve if you use enough buzzwords and wear a shirt with buttons. By the end of the week, I'd rerouted the external hose spigot, the very one Karen's pool boy used like a lifeline, into the auxiliary drainage system in my basement. Normally, it only handles overflow during major storms. But now, it was connected to a reservoir that captured everything from the upstairs shower drain, washing machine outflow, and a little leftover runoff from the laundry sink. Not exactly a biohazard, but enough to smell earthy, slightly fermented. Like if you left a locker room towel in a blender and then poured it over warm concrete. I even labeled the new setup. A shiny red sign that read, "Non-potable, do not drink." Just in case. I wanted this to be legal, poetic, and undeniable. Then I waited, and waited. For 3 whole days, Karen didn't touch the hose. I began to think she'd caught wind of my trap, that maybe one of her drones had picked up the plumbing work, or that her landscaper had finally developed a spine. But no, it turns out Karen was simply planning a party. I found the flyer wedged into my mailbox on Saturday morning, printed on glossy cardstock. Willow Bend Poolside Social. Hosted by HOA President Karen Mitchell, Sunday at 2 p.m. Swimsuits encouraged. Mimosas provided. The woman had the subtlety of a foghorn in a church. I marked my calendar, I mowed my lawn, I cleaned my windows, and at precisely 1:37 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, I watched from behind my blinds as Karen's landscaper, now wearing a branded Mitchell HOA visor, came strutting down the alley and reached for my hose. He looked both ways like a cartoon bandit, then yanked the green coil through the fence like always. I clicked the record button on my backyard camera and leaned back in my chair, heart racing like I was about to detonate a heist. The hose stretched taut across the yard. He connected it to Karen's filtration rig, some monstrosity she bought online that claimed to remove 99.9% of toxins from pool water, which is hilarious given what was about to happen, and cranked the valve. The water began to flow, not in a rush, not with pressure, but in a slow, syrupy burble that you could almost smell through the screen. The first thing to hit them was the odor. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, as Karen, sipping from a mimosa glass the size of a toddler's head, lifted her sunglasses and sniffed the air with a wrinkled nose. Her husband Greg, shirtless and sunburned, said something that made her laugh. That's when the pool filter made a loud gurgle, like a belch from Satan's jacuzzi. The water coming out of the hose was cloudy, slightly beige. It had the consistency of soup left out too long. One of the guests, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat and an aggressive sundress, leaned over the pool to inspect it. And then she recoiled like someone had slapped her with a mop. Karen stormed over, peered in, her face twisted. She picked up the hose, sniffed it, and screamed, loud. It wasn't just a yelp. It was the sound of someone realizing they'd just pumped 3 gallons of laundry-scented sewer into their 50-0 pool in front of 20 HOA members and 3 smartphone cameras. Greg slipped on the wet patio and hit the ground like a dropped ham. One of the teenage guests gagged and shouted, "It smells like a urinal!" Karen, still in mid-hysteria, dove into the pool, whether to save it or prove it wasn't contaminated or just escape reality, I'll never know, and immediately surfaced with a shriek. The footage, which would later go viral under the title HOA Karen vs. Sewer Pool, captured her flailing like a raccoon in a bubble bath. The landscaper ran, abandoning the hose like a murder weapon. A neighbor in a golf cart pulled out his phone and started filming. I just sipped my coffee. The fire department arrived within 15 minutes. Apparently, someone had called 911 and reported possible chemical contamination. The hazmat team showed up not long after, yellow suits, breathing gear, the works. They blocked off the whole yard with caution tape, sealed the pool, and started testing the water. I watched it all unfold like theater. It was better than Broadway. Karen sobbed under a blanket while EMTs checked her blood pressure. Greg limped in circles, trying to convince the officers he hadn't defrauded anyone. One of the firefighters slipped on the same patio Greg had, which was a personal bonus. And then came the emergency HOA meeting. Called less than 24 hours after the pool incident. Held at the community center, packed to the gills with residents still buzzing from the viral video. Karen tried to speak first, claiming sabotage and a malicious plumbing attack by a rogue neighbor. But I walked in with a stack of evidence, printed footage of the hose thefts, the exemption documents proving she had no authority over my property and my plumbing permits. I also brought a signed letter from Cal stating that the spigot had been marked as non-potable and that any unauthorized use was against best practice and basic common sense. I didn't say a word. Just handed the packet to the board secretary and sat down. The silence that followed was magnificent. Karen's face went from orange to gray. Greg started muttering about lawyers. The board whispered in frantic circles. And then Martha Jenkins, board treasurer and unlikely folk hero, stood up and said, "If this is true, we need to vote on her removal." And they did. In a unanimous decision, Karen was removed as president pending investigation. The HOA froze all discretionary funds tied to her pool installation. Her landscaper was blacklisted from neighborhood contracts. And her prized poolside lounge influencer livestream, which had once drawn in half the HOA wives, was officially shut down. The hazmat cleanup wasn't cheap. Last I heard, Karen had to drain the pool, bleach the entire liner, and regrout the tiles. Greg tried to sue me, but the judge tossed it out in 5 minutes after seeing the permits. My water bill went back to normal, my spigot stayed capped, and just for fun, I installed a little garden fountain where the hose used to be. It gurgles softly every afternoon. Smells faintly of lavender and dish soap, and every time it bubbles, I smile. Because while Karen thought she was running the neighborhood, she forgot one important rule of plumbing: what goes around always flows back. It wasn't the courtroom I expected, but in the end, it was the one Karen deserved. Folding chairs, a folding table, and 48 people packed into the Willow Bend Community Recreation Center like it was the final night of community theater. The walls still smelled faintly of chlorine and cinnamon-scented disinfectant, and the laminated "HOA members only beyond this point" sign had been flipped upside down in someone's haste. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by Greg on her left and Cheryl, 9 gnomes and a dream Simmons on her right, both visibly sweating. Greg had that tax audit look on his face, the one you wear when you know you're screwed but are still holding out for a miracle. Karen, for once, was quiet. No clipboard, no smug grin. Just 2 hands clenched so tightly around her designer water bottle I thought it might crack. The HOA had called this Special Emergency Budgetary Review and Governance Session, which is legalese for "we've been caught and someone's gotta burn." I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in my best courtroom flannel, carrying a milk crate full of binders, documents, and USB sticks like it was a briefcase from hell. Martha Jenkins greeted me at the door with a pat on the back and a whispered, "They're not ready for this." She was right. I walked past Karen without acknowledging her, dropped my crate on the table with a satisfying thud, and set up my laptop to mirror onto the projector. The room dimmed. The HOA vice president cleared his throat. "We're here tonight to discuss accusations of misuse of HOA resources and misconduct by President Karen Mitchell." Karen opened her mouth to object, but I was already clicking the first slide. Exhibit A, theft of water, timestamped footage. Up came a series of clips, each more damning than the last. Karen's landscaper attaching my hose to her pool's intake. Karen herself walking across my property in a silk robe and slippers. The drone. The margarita float. The fake smile she wore as she leaned over my fence to fiddle with the faucet like it owed her rent. Gasps filled the room. Someone said, "Oh my God," out loud. Greg shifted in his seat like the floor was getting hotter. I let the footage run, silent, uninterrupted. When it ended, I switched to the second slide. Exhibit B, Grandwater Covenant, Zoning Exemption, Lot 14, B. I explained how my house, originally part of Oak Ridge Agricultural, was legally exempt from HOA authority under a grandfather clause dated 1973. I read aloud the clause itself, printed directly from the county's public records portal. No future HOA or covenant-based entity shall exercise rule-making power over the parcel designated 14B so long as the primary structure remains original and intact. My structure was original, still is. I had pictures. I had city permits. I had notarized letters from Ruth, God rest her soul, saying she refused to sell her land to the HOA because they'd probably ban wind chimes and Jesus flags. She was right. I clicked to the third slide. Exhibit C, Fraudulent Financial Redirection. This was where it got real. Using publicly available HOA budget documents and a little accounting help from Cal's sister, a CPA with a vengeful streak, I showed line-by-line breakdowns of Karen's emergency landscaping funds over the past 6 months. The numbers didn't lie. Nearly 48. 0 had been reallocated from general maintenance, sidewalk repair, and drainage inspection, directly to a line item labeled Landscape Enhancement, East Commons. The address? 110 Willow Bend Lane. Karen's house, her pool, her godforsaken koi-shaped patio umbrella. A murmur of voices rippled across the crowd. Several residents stood. One woman, Mrs. Darlington, who'd been fined $100 last year for insufficient shrub symmetry, began to cry. Cheryl tried to interject with a chirpy, "Well, the pool does increase property values," but it was too late. The room had turned. Someone called for Karen's resignation. A man near the back shouted, "She used my dues to buy her pool tiles." Another demanded a vote. It was chaos in linen slacks and orthopedic shoes. That's when the fire marshal stood up. Yeah, him. I didn't know he'd be there. But he rose with the confidence of a man who had receipts. "Per our investigation," he said, voice steady, "the contamination event at 110 Willow Bend was caused by unauthorized redirection of non-potable graywater. Furthermore, the structure used to filter said water was not permitted, and the hose line lacked a backflow preventer, which violates City Code 19.4. Karen blinked like she'd been hit with a tranquilizer dart. He continued, "Due to biohazard concerns, the pool must be drained, chemically treated, and permanently disabled until further inspection. Any attempt to refill without authorization will result in fines starting at 10-0. Karen opened her mouth again. Greg put a hand on her arm. She shut it. I wasn't done. Final slide. Exhibit D, personal statement. I told the room about the fines, about the noise violations, the drone, the hostile compost energy citation. I read each one aloud like they were verses from the HOA Bible of Petty. Violation 12, I read, was for a garden hose visible from the street. That hose, ladies and gentlemen, was the very one Karen stole, dragged through her hedges, and used to fill her pool for weeks on end. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I could feel the tide rising behind me, an invisible force of long-suppressed irritation aimed directly at Karen's perfectly contoured face. Someone behind me started clapping, just one person. But then another joined in, and another, until half the room was on their feet, applauding like they'd just watched a Broadway finale where the villain finally got fed to the wolves. The board didn't even need to deliberate. Karen was removed unanimously, fined, banned from holding office in any Willow Bend committee in perpetuity. Her pool, which once glittered like the crown jewel of suburban vanity, was drained the following morning. A hazmat crew in full gear did it. Neighbors watched from lawn chairs. Greg tried to joke with them. No one laughed. 2 days later, a for sale sign appeared in their yard. 3 weeks after that, it was joined by a smaller one beneath it. Price reduced, motivated seller. I didn't see Karen again after that. Rumor has it she moved to a gated community 2 towns over. One where the HOA meetings are private, and the covenants are stricter, and no one dares install wind chimes. Meanwhile, I made a few upgrades, nothing flashy. Just a small stone fountain installed where the hose used to be. Cal helped with the plumbing. It runs on a recycled graywater loop, legal, permitted, and slightly chlorinated. Every afternoon, it lets out a gentle gurgle, a soft, echoing burble that sounds just a little like a toilet flushing underwater. My new favorite noise. It can be heard faintly from the Mitchell's old yard, now occupied by a quiet couple with a rescue dog and an actual sense of community. And every time I hear it, I smile, not out of spite, not anymore. But because sometimes when the water gets murky enough and the politics dirty enough, the only justice that makes sense is the kind that smells like poetic sewage.